Hey guys, and welcome to a new video. This week I decided that because the Thunderbolts movie is coming out soon, that I would do a video talking about USAgent, aka John Walker, or at this point in time, as this comic that I'm about to read takes place, he's known as Jack Daniels. USAgent has had a few comic books that have released that, like a few solo titles that he starred in, that haven't ran for very long. Like usually they've been miniseries or like a 5-issue series, and so I'm going to be reading them all today because there isn't very much to read. So I just thought we'd read all of the USAgent stuff. To give you a little bit of a rundown of his backstory, like if you've seen the MCU version, which is John Walker, it's not that much different to that. Like out of all of the like MCU characters, John Walker's backstory is one of the most accurate to the comics. The most major difference between the comic book version and the movie version, or the TV series version, I guess, is that Captain America was not dead when John Walker became Captain America in the comics. Originally, he had an identity known as the US Patriot. He was basically testing Captain America because he believed that Captain America wasn't the right hero for America, so he created his own identity to battle Captain America and prove that the way that he did things was better. Eventually, the government believed the same thing and asked Steve Rogers to step down from being Captain America. And Captain America, like Steve Rogers, obliged because at that point in time, he was going through a very tough time in his life where he no longer believed in the American flag. And so he gave up his identity as Captain America and became a character known as Nomad, while John Walker was made Captain America. And as Captain America, John Walker was not as ruthless as he was in the TV series. They definitely tried to make him a lot more hateable in that, but he was definitely more violent than Captain America. Like the way he did things, like he would break people's limbs on purpose and borderline torture his foes to get information out of them, something that Captain America wouldn't do. John Walker also had no problem with killing terrorists, which is another thing that Captain America was always averted to. You know, like if he had to kill someone, John Walker would do it. So eventually, while John Walker he kind of starts off as an antagonist. Right now, he's pretty much redeemed himself by this point, because eventually Steve Rogers came back, regained the Captain America title, and John Walker decided to work secretly for the government. And in order to do that, the government faked his death, and he took on a new identity, which is Jack Daniels, and a new superhero identity, or anti-hero identity, I guess you could call it, US Agent. So that is now his official name, and I wouldn't even really call him an anti-hero. Like, he's straight up a superhero at this point. Like, he does things a little bit differently. He's a little bit more violent, but he's still a superhero. And he's actually a member of the Avengers at this point in time. He's a member of the West Coast Avengers, which is the team led by Hawkeye. They're a little bit more laid back than the regular Avengers. It's honestly the better series out of the two. And so, yeah, that's pretty much all of the backstory. Oh, yeah, and John's parents are dead. They were killed by a group of terrorists, and I think that ended up fueling his vengeance against terrorism and bad guys. So yeah, at this point in time, he's working for the West Coast Avengers. So let's just get straight into the comic, shall we, and see what Jack Daniels gets up to. So this first miniseries, which is a 4-issue miniseries that came out in 1993, is written by Mark Gruenwald, and MC Wyman is the artist for the series. Mark Gruenwald, well known for having one of the longest Captain America runs of all time. Also, many considered it to be one of the best Captain America runs. He created John Walker, aka USAgent. So the first issue begins with these assassins who are known as the Scourges of the Underworld. Like, they don't have any real names. They're just known as Scourges. They wear, like, white coats and hats and cover their faces, and they could be either gender, honestly. So their goal is to assassinate former supervillains or criminals or current supervillains. And they get sent out by their organization to do so. Also, I forgot to mention something interesting about John Walker's origin that is also pretty accurate in the MCU is that so in the MCU, he was hired by Valerie Fontaine to become USAgent. And there's a character called Val Cooper who is the comic version of Valerie Fontaine. She's directly involved in John Walker becoming USAgent in the comics too. And he also gets his super strength from the Power Broker, which you would know that the Power Broker is a character in the MCU as well. And so there's a connection between them as well, just like there is in the MCU, which is, I thought, something that was interesting to mention, just how accurate the movie version, accurate yet different the movie version is. So yeah, we start off with this Scourge. He's entering an apartment building where he finds a criminal who used to be called the Masked Matador, but now he's just a regular guy. And he's looking after his sister's children, and the Scourge is there to assassinate this guy. And the guy's like, well, if you're going to kill me, at least make sure that the kids are out of the room because they don't deserve to see this. You know, I've come to peace with who I am, and I've paid my dues. So if you need to do it, then just get it over with. Just don't do it in front of the kids. And the Scourge can't do it. Like, they just can't do it. And so the Scourge runs out of the room, bumps into a woman as she's entering the building, probably the sister, gets into the van, and one of the members of the organization, known as Domino, who might be the Domino that you're thinking of, like the character that's like related to X Factor. It might be that Domino. I don't know. They come in through the radio asking the Scourge, like, if they went through with their assassination, in which the Scourge didn't. So he's broken the rules, or they've broken the rules. And so Scourge, like, blasts the radio out of fear that, like, the organization is going to come for them. So we then switch over to Jack Daniels' point of view as he's just gotten back to the Avengers compound. Like, he'd helped a priest on the road who had crashed their car. He helps him change his tires, and the priest asks Jack to come to his church and talk about the things that are obviously troubling him, because this priest can just see right through Jack and can see that there's something, like, off, you know? And so Jack kind of considers it, but he probably isn't going to go. Instead, he heads back to the Avengers compound where they're having a party, because the West Coast Avengers are a little bit looser than the Avengers, and they party and stuff. And, you know, we got Simon Williams, aka Wonder Man, and Hawkeye, and Jack is a little bit more serious than they are. He doesn't really like the other members of the West Coast Avengers, so he refuses to party with them. He just wants to head up to his room and rest. When he gets there, he finds a blow-up doll, and he's like, oh, what a stupid joke. Like, he finds a sex doll, and he's like, stupid joke from Barton, thinks he's funny. You know, I'm the only one here that's actually treating things seriously. I need to get out there and be doing something. I can't just be sitting here. I'm so bored. So he heads down into the computer room where he finds a guy named Sandros, who is the member of the West Coast Avengers who helps them find their missions. So he asks Sandros if there's anything out there for him to go and help someone. And Sandros is like, sorry, I don't have anything. And so Jack decides to sit down next to Sandros and just chill for a bit. And that's when they get a call in from a woman who is crying for help. And she tells USAgent to meet her at a bar in Melrose, and to tell her a specific set of code words to know, like, so that she knows that it's him, that it's the right person and not one of these assassins that's trying to kill her. The code words being Sheboygan makes good sausages. That's how that like if she finds someone who says that, then that means that it's the US agent. So he heads off to the bar where the bouncer won't let him in, and so Jack almost breaks his arm. The guy starts screaming, and he's like, "Hey, stop being a baby! I'm just twisting your arm. I'm not breaking it." He starts looking through the crowd. He approaches a woman and says the code words, and she's like, "Sheboygan, what are you talking about? My name's Shannon." And then, so this Shannon tries to like take Jack away so they can make out or something, but Jack refuses because he's too busy working on his mission. He sees a woman in the corner of the room, looks a little suspicious, so he goes over to talk to this woman. He says the code words, and it turns out this is the woman that he's looking for. Her name is Lisa Winters, and she's being hunted down by the Scourges because her twin sister is a criminal called Mysteria, and so they've mistaken her for a sister, and so she needs help. And so US agent is like, all right, I'll see if there's anyone in here who's trying to kill you. And so he makes a trap, basically, like a distraction. US agent has like a flying cycle that he drives around in. And so he gets the sex doll from earlier, puts a coat over it, and has it sitting behind him as he flies away, luring the assassin out so that the assassin shoots the sex toy. And so US agent is able to confirm that, yes, an assassin is after Lisa. So he sees the assassin get into a van and drive away, so he chases after the van. He manages to get on top of the van, and he tries to pull the guy out of the van, but only rips his sleeve off. The guy ends up jumping out of the van, and US agent has to like jump off of the van before it smacks straight into a cliff, which he does. He jumps off, van smacks into a cliff, assassin gets away, he heads back to Lisa Winters, he calls for help from the Avengers compound so they can send a helicopter over to pick the both of them up. So Simon arrives with a helicopter and picks up Jack and Lisa, and Jack then starts questioning Lisa. He's like, the assassin that I faced, like, he was a slippery son of a bitch, and he was clearly smarter. Like, he was smart enough to know that he was going after the right person. So, I don't think you're telling me the truth. I don't think you have a twin sister called Mysteria. I think they really are after you. I think that you are one of them. And Lisa is like, you're right. I am one of them. I am a scourge, but I never killed anyone because I couldn't go through with my first kill, and now they are after me, trying to kill me, so I need your help, please. And so it's revealed that she was the scourge that we saw at the beginning of the comic who failed to kill the Masked Matador, which is really interesting. It's why I referred to that first scourge as they, because calling them him wouldn't have been correct. But yeah, so that's the big reveal at the end of the issue, and we'll have to find out in the next issue if US agent is going to be able to protect Lisa from this organization that is out to kill her. Alright, so in the next issue we get to learn more about Lisa's past, or her true identity, because her real name isn't Lisa, it's actually Priscilla. And so Jack and Priscilla are looking through a warehouse, because apparently this is where Priscilla's, like, the person who trained her was stationed. But when they get there, they don't find anyone except a punk trying to steal hubcaps from a car. So Jack beats the crap out of this guy and hangs him up on a signpost, and they take the car and use it to drive around the city while they talk to each other. And Jack learns of Priscilla's origin, which is she has a brother called Phil who got into, like, drugs, and the parents were against it, and so he left to go and drug deal in Florida. And so Priscilla didn't want to abandon her brother, so she headed off to Florida as well, and she couldn't find him, and on the way to looking for him, she crossed paths with the character Nomad. Though I don't think that this is the Steve Rogers version. I think this is another character who also used the name Nomad because it doesn't look like Steve Rogers. But this Nomad decides to help her, and eventually they team up and become partners in crime. And she joins the Avengers, like the West Coast Avengers. She meets Demolition Man. She meets Captain America, who I think was the John Walker version at the time. Because you mentioned how he had like a similar costume to USAgent. I don't know. It's a little confusing. She goes on multiple adventures with the Avengers, and eventually her brother is killed, and she has to go to his funeral. And that's what makes her decide to leave the Avengers and go on her own path, where she meets a woman who decides to offer her a job as a quote-unquote superhero. What she doesn't know is that she's being recruited by the Scourges. They train her to become a Scourge. Her final mission is to, like, her final training mission is to follow another Scourge and see how an assassination goes down, which she does perfectly. And then she gets given her first assassination assignment, which is Matador, and we saw how that went down. She couldn't go through with killing him and ended up abandoning it. Somehow they knew that she didn't kill him, and now they're after her, trying to kill her. And that's pretty much the entire backstory for her. There's also a couple of moments where she actually met John Walker, or Jack, as he's known now. He saved her from a Scourge assassin some time ago, and he was like, "Oh, I thought I recognized you." And then she also gave him clues to go and take down Dr. Mueller, I think his name is, who works for Domino, the owner of the organization that creates the Scourges. This isn't the Domino I was talking about. It turns out this is a different Domino. It's a guy who goes by the codename Mr. Jackson whenever he meets somebody in person. And so with her origin out of the way, they decide to lure in the Scourge that is currently trying to assassinate her. So they rig her van up as a trap. The Scourge comes to assassinate her, and USAgent gives them the jump, but he gets tear gas sprayed in his eye. But USAgent manages to catch the Scourge's leg and kind of like cut his leg with a piece of glass. So as the Scourge tries to run away, USAgent then grabs him and pulls him out of the van as the Scourge tries to drive away, and just beats the crap out of him and knocks him out. And so he decides to then take the Scourge alongside Priscilla to the house of the priest that he met earlier, so that he can question him. Because the priest has a cellar in his house, and he asks the priest if they can use the cellar, keep the guy down there until he's ready to talk. Don't let him out or anything, because someone might come and try and kill him. That's why they can't take him to the police or to the Avengers, because he's afraid that if he takes him to the Avengers or the police, this Scourge might get killed. And then USAgent decides to head off and lure another Scourge to him by pretending to be the Scourge that he found. This Scourge's name would later be revealed to be Decker, so we'll just call him that from now on. So he disguises himself as Decker. He heads back to Priscilla's van and finds out that it's being towed. And so he has to break into what's left of the van. And then he like jury rigs the radio in it and disguises his voice as Decker's voice using like voice recognition technology that he has. He then calls Domino and lies to him and tells him that he is Decker and that he got shot and that he needs help. So Domino agrees to send a Scourge to go and help him. And meanwhile, the priest is having a chat with Priscilla. And also, before John Walker went out to disguise himself as Decker, the priest told him that in return for allowing John to store this scourge in his cellar, John has to promise the priest that he will have a long chat, that they will chat for as long as Decker has been kept in his cellar. And John agrees to that. It's like, yes, all right, fine. I'll talk to you after this is all over. And so the scourge that the Domino has sent arrives to meet Jack. And so Jack gets into his car, pretending to be Decker. This scourge immediately knows that it's not Decker, and is like, hey, I've got a gift for you. Pulls out a gun and shoots Jack. And he's like, you're not Decker. Like, where is the real Decker? And so we're left on a bit of a cliffhanger of like, has John just been shot to death? I keep switching between calling him John and Jack. That's the problem with having a character who has a well-established name but is going by a different name. You end up just accidentally calling them by both their names. Just know that if I ever say John or Jack, I'm talking about the same guy, and it's just a slip of the tongue. All right, sorry about that. It's just it's hard to remember which name. I might just call him John from now on because there's no point calling him Jack when John is his, most notable name. But yeah, that's the end of that issue, and so we'll move on to issue 3. So far, I'm enjoying this series quite a bit, and if you're enjoying it just as much as I am, then please feel free to subscribe to my channel, where I will be releasing more videos like this every Sunday, just different comic books that I'll be focusing on. I'm on a bit of a Marvel high at the moment, where I'm covering a bunch of Marvel comics. Eventually I'll be going back to DC, but for now we're just going to be doing like these little one-off videos about all these obscure characters. Yeah. Alright, so in issue 3, John is currently being interrogated by 2 members of the Scourge organization, Caprice and Bloodstain, that's their code names, and they are using a drug that forces John to relive some of his darkest memories. So he's sent back to a few different times in his life, the first one being a time that he went back in time. He traveled in time at some point and went back to Vietnam in an attempt to save his brother who had died in Vietnam. So he went back there, he met his brother Mike, and then an explosion happened, killing Mike, and which really upset John because, he was supposed to save him, and he still failed to do so. So it's kind of one of those things of like, well, if something happens, chances are you won't be able to stop it from happening, especially if it's meant to. And so they learn from that memory that his name is John, aka or Jack. They don't know what his last name is. They still think it's just Daniels, so they think his name is either John Daniels or Jack Daniels. So they put John through another memory, which is the memory of his parents' death at the hands of the terrorists. Because what happened was John's friends blurted his name out, so the terrorists found out what his real name was, and so they kidnapped his parents, and they kidnapped John as well. And so John pretended to hang himself to distract the terrorists away from his parents. But pretending to hang himself gave his father a heart attack, which is what killed him. And so John, ran down to check his father's body. And his mother was like, why did you do that? You know he had a weak heart. Why did you, worry him so much? And now he's dead. And John's, breaking down. And then his mum just gets shot in the back and dies. And so it's from that memory that Caprice and Bloodstain learned the names of John's parents. So they continue investigating into the USAgent and John's parents to try and figure out his name. Meanwhile, John is forced to go through another memory, which is the memory of after his parents were killed, he tortured his own friends because they're the reason his parents died, because they stupidly blurted out his name. So he sets up a fire underneath them and kind of tortures them, thinking that he makes them think that he's going to let them get blown up by a car, because there's like a car hanging next to them. They are hanging upside down, tied together, and there's a fire underneath them. And the idea is that the fire would set the car on fire and then blow them up. But John doesn't go through with it and is like, yeah, I'd rather just, interrogate you guys. So he knocks the gas canister away. But what he doesn't realize is that the oil is spilled out and the fire is still going. And so the car blows up anyway, killing his friends. And so that upsets John too, because he's like, I was just trying to scare them and interrogate them for what they did. I didn't mean to kill them. And now I've killed my own friends. So it's like, John just currently, accidentally messing up his life multiple times. So it's at this point in time that Bloodstain realizes who John is. He knows his real identity. And so he gets Caprice. He tells her to leave so that he can continue interrogating John by himself. And so she reluctantly leaves. And that's when Bloodstain frees John and reveals himself to be Mike, John's brother. And he basically explains to John that the Scourge organization is owned by the CIA and that he didn't actually die in Vietnam and he was hired to become a Scourge, and that the Scourges aren't the bad guys. They're just taking down the bad guys. They're not trying to kill Priscilla. They're trying to fake her death, just like how the government faked John's death when they made him USAgent. And so he really gets into John's head, and John kind of believes that it is his brother, but part of him believes, doesn't know if it actually is his brother. So he leaves, and Mike gives him a card saying, call me if you decide that you want to work with us, because we are the good guys. So John leaves. He calls the priest on the phone and says that he needs to talk to him right now. And so the priest is like, all right, I'll see you in 2 hours. We'll have that talk that you clearly need. And then we find out that Bloodstain has called Domino, and it turns out that Bloodstain isn't actually Mike. Or he might be, but he was lying to John. We don't know exactly how much he was lying. He says, he bought the whole brother story, so it's assumed that this isn't actually Mike, but it might just be a case of, it is Mike, but he was lying about the organization and about, what happened after Vietnam and stuff like that. We don't know. We're probably going to find out in the next issue. Either way, if John calls Mike to meet him, he's walking right into a deadly trap, and we'll see how that turns out in the final issue of this 4-issue miniseries. All right, and so we move on to the final issue, which begins with Bloodstain and one of the it's Caprice. Bloodstain and Caprice are watching John as he arrives at the priest's home, where he is going to interrogate Decker and try and finally get the information from him that they need. Decker hasn't eaten anything for a few days, so John agrees to take some food into him for him to eat. But when he does so, Decker tries to get a jump on him and kill him. So John was like, all right, I was going to give you food, but now I'm not going to give it to you unless you tell me what I need to know. He grabs Decker, he hangs him up on a wall, and then interrogates him. And Decker basically explains to him that Bloodstain is his trainer, and that they would be watching him, and that he's going to he would be happy to take John to where the Domino is. And so John grabs Decker and Priscilla. They head out to the car with Decker, and they get into the car because they're going to head off to where Domino is so they can find out who Domino works for, because it turns out that Domino isn't even the head of the organization. He's being ordered around by somebody else. So to find out who that person is, they need to find Domino. But before they can drive away, 2 Scourges arrive, and one of them kills Decker, just shoots him in the back of the head. The other one holds Priscilla by gunpoint, but Priscilla has a gun of her own, and she manages to turn around quick enough and shoot this Scourge in the abdomen. So the Scourge falls over and starts bleeding out. And it turns out that this Scourge is Caprice. The other Scourge manages to get away and runs to a nearby van. And this Scourge is actually Bloodstain. And he calls John pretending to be Mike. And John pretends that he believes Bloodstain and is going to meet him. But in actuality, he has no plans on meeting Bloodstain and joining him. Instead, he's going to interrogate Caprice to find out where Domino is. Caprice agrees to tell him where Domino is because John is like, if you don't tell us, we'll let you bleed out. So while John heads off to go and find Domino, Caprice is tended to by the priest. So John finds out where the Domino is, or they sometimes refer to him as Chubbs. He breaks straight through the wall and grabs the Domino and is like, tell me, like, show me where your, like, master is, like, whoever is your leader, your boss, like, take me to them, or I will shove all of these data disks down your throat. And so Domino agrees to take John to see the boss. They go to a nearby hospital where they find this guy, and he's just an old man in his 80s in a wheelchair. Turns out this guy used to be a superhero called the Angel back in the 40s. But no matter how much he tried, some criminals would still get away with killing people. And so that pushed him down the path of creating the organization, creating the Scourges in order to combat criminals and assassinate them. He saw it as him making up for failing to save people. And John is like, you're an idiot. Like, you didn't make up for anything that you did. You know, I'm going to go straight to the government and tell them exactly what you're doing. And so it's then revealed that one of the nurses that is wheeling him around is actually Bloodstain in disguise. He pulls a mask off and is like, you said you were going to go meet me, and it turns out you were lying to me, so I guess I'm going to have to kill you now. And Bloodstain pulls out a gun and starts shooting at John. John fights back against him. The bullets from the gun actually blast a bunch of statues, which cause them to fall over like dominoes. And Domino himself is next to one of the statues, and he's like, the statues are falling over like domino, and the statue falls onto him, crushing him, which is a funny, ironic way to die. The boss in the wheelchair, who's his name's not really revealed, but like, because it's still a secret, because the government doesn't know who he is, he gets knocked out of his wheelchair, and because he needs a wheelchair, he can't get up, he's just on the ground helpless, while John and Bloodstain fight each other. Bloodstain tries to shoot at John, but John grabs his shield, and the bullets bounce off the shield, riddling Bloodstain with bullets and killing him. So, yeah, what a dumb way to die, is that you die from your own bullets being reflected back at you. So Bloodstain is dead. John has defeated the organization, and he just wants to leave the boss to just be helpless, you know, because this guy is just like, help me, I can't walk, I'm in a wheelchair, you can't leave a man in a wheelchair like this. And John's like, watch me, like, you're a terrible guy and I don't give a crap about you, I'd be fine with you dying here, but the authorities are probably going to find you eventually. And so he leaves the boss of the organization of the Scourge boss, to eventually be found by authorities. And John is taken to the hospital because he's been shot at and stuff, so he's quite wounded. And while he's at the hospital, the priest and Priscilla arrive, and the priest and John decide to finally have the talk that they've promised to have with each other, where John admits that going through all of this entire thing with the Scourge and his brother makes him realize that he's got a lot of skeletons in his closet that he needs to deal with, and that by the time he's done confessing everything to this priest, he will hope that it will bring him further on that path of redemption, because he doesn't want to end up like Bloodstain. It's actually a funny moment in this where John is like, he ended up becoming his own namesake because he was riddled with bullets, so he was covered in bloodstains. I thought that was funny. And so, yeah, that's where the miniseries ends. It ends with John deciding that he doesn't want to be like Bloodstain or his brother. Like, he still doesn't even know if Bloodstain really was his brother or not. But either way, he doesn't want to become like that. And he is determined to continue going down his path of redemption to becoming a superhero. And that's where it ends. Overall, I think this miniseries was pretty good. You can tell that the plot was kind of rushed towards the end. A lot of stuff happens in issues 3 and 4 because it's just a 4-issue miniseries. I feel like this series could have probably been a little bit better if it had 5 issues instead of 4, just to allow this last issue to kind of breathe, because it's really just trying to wrap everything up within 24 pages of story, which with all the plot threads that were currently going on in this, wasn't easy to do without it feeling a little bit jumbled, a little bit rushed. The third issue was probably the worst one, just because it's kind of just going over everything that we'd already gone over previously. Like, we got to see how his parents died, but we already know how his parents died, so it felt kind of like filler going through all those old memories. The only memory that really mattered to the story was the one about his brother dying in Vietnam, because that would tie into the Bloodstain arc that was going on within the same miniseries. I don't know if Bloodstain ever comes back. I assume he's dead, because he got riddled with bullets. But who knows? Maybe he does come back in a future USAgent comic. But yeah, that's the end of this miniseries. Definitely recommend checking it out, especially if you like Mark Gruenwald's Captain America. It's very well written, and John Walker is a pretty great character. I enjoy reading his stories, and I enjoyed reading this miniseries. And so now we're going to be moving on to the next miniseries that was released for USAgent. All right, so the next series that we're going to be talking about is USAgent Volume 2, which was a 3-issue miniseries released in 2001, written by Jerry Ordway, with art by Ordway and Carl Kessel. So 8 years have passed since the last series, and John Walker is in a very different place now than he was back then. He no longer looks like Captain America anymore. Like, he doesn't have a similar suit to Cap. Instead, his suit now looks a lot like Judge Dredd. Like, he straight up just has a Judge Dredd outfit on, especially his helmet. His shield looks a lot more like the shield that Soldier Boy has in the Boys comics and the show. And he now has an electric baton that he uses, which makes him even more like Judge Dredd. He has, like, police-like weapons that he uses against criminals. Because John Walker now works for STARS, who are an organization that goes around finding criminal fugitives and taking them down. They work separately from S.H.I.E.L.D., and they often butt heads with S.H.I.E.L.D. because they tend to interrupt in matters that S.H.I.E.L.D. is trying to deal with personally. So the issue begins with John going off on a mission to infiltrate a Hydra base to find a fugitive supervillain. The supervillain turns out to be Machete, who is a character that I had previously seen in the GLA miniseries that I covered a while back. Machete appears in that series where he teams up with some of the other supervillains. So he crashes into this base and finds Machete, and during this we get kind of sped up on everything that's happened to John Walker. He became a member of STARS, and then the local governor, who is Mr. Workhauser, had asked had basically forced his assistant to join STARS and become John Walker's second in command, or his partner. And this woman is somebody that John knows from his past. Her name is Kali Weiss, and John didn't want to work with her, but Val Cooper convinced him to work with her. And so now they're working together, trying to take down Hydra. So yeah, John heads there. He finds Machete. He grabs Machete. Carly is late by a few seconds. And when she arrives, both sides are firing bullets. Hydra is firing at Carly. Carly is in a helicopter shooting bullets as John runs through the bullet fire with Machete. He gets onto the helicopter. He's quite annoyed that Carly was late. He becomes even more annoyed that Machete has become riddled with bullets and is now dead. And so eventually they cross paths with S.H.I.E.L.D. Like, they get back to the Stars headquarters and S.H.I.E.L.D. arrives. Dum Dum Dugan, agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. arrives and is like, what the hell were you doing? Like, we were watching what was going on at that Hydra base, and you just went in and you ruined everything. Machete had all of those Hydra men under mind control, and we wanted to know what he was using Hydra for. And it turns out that Machete is pushing like counterfeit mind control stuff around. And so they're going to try and like investigate his operations and figure out where he's getting the supply of mind control stuff from. Later, John and Carly discover that a couple of the bullets that were inside Machete were Carly's bullets from her men. And then there was also a couple in there that were from John's men. So Machete was partly responsible for being killed by their own people, and Carly kind of frames it as an accident. But what we later learn is that it wasn't an accident. So John and Carly have a complicated relationship. They used to date each other, and now they don't. But there's still tension between them. Another member of Stars believes that Carly is using John so that she won't take the fall for her bullets being found in Machete. So she's using his emotions to get him to defend her so that she doesn't get drops from Stars. We find out that this agent is absolutely right because Carly goes and visits Governor Werkhauser, and we discover that she killed Machete on purpose, but she wasn't expecting them to find her bullets and trace them back to her. So she had to come up with this story of like, oh, it was an accident, when it wasn't an accident. And so Werkhauser gives her this little bug-like device, which I'm assuming is possibly like a bug for tracking John. And she heads back to where John currently is, because John has found out from Val Cooper that there is a supervillainess called Pound Cakes who is in the same operation as Machete. She's, delivering mind control stuff to the Atlanteans. And Val is like, do you think it's probably, do you think it could be Namor? And John's like, nah, it wouldn't be Namor. There's no reason why Namor would be dealing in, weaponry and stuff like that. It doesn't make any sense. And so John has to go to Atlantis to investigate further. So they have, an underwater ship for him to use. Carly comes along with him. They head into the ship, and they head off to Atlantis. And while they're in the ship, Carly slips the bug into John's coat. And that's where the first issue ends. It ends on that little cliffhanger of them arriving in Atlantis. And we'll find out what happens next in issue 2. All right, so issue 2, the Stars team, which consists of John Walker, Carly Freese, Ali Magruder, and another character named Croyce, are all in Atlantis. And they start getting attacked by Atlanteans, so Ali decides to jump on a little underwater bike to shoot at the Atlanteans and get them away from them. They're there to find not the power broker. They're there to find Pound Cakes, who has been, giving these mysterious mind control bugs to the Atlanteans. And so she takes her pay from the Atlanteans and decides to leave immediately. And so John wants to go after her. Cal manages to go after Pound Cakes, chases after her, gets onto Pound Cakes' her getaway boat, while John helps Croyce deal with the bag of mind bugs that he's found within one of the Atlantean palaces. And they get attacked by Atlanteans, but are saved by Namor, who shows up just in time and tells John and Croyce to get away from Atlantis. And so John leaves, they get back to the ship where Croyce looks after the mind control bugs, while John goes to help Callie fight Pound Cakes, because Callie's struggling against Pound Cakes, because Pound Cakes has, she's got like seismic boots that can really hurt people. And so John manages to get onto the boat while Callie gets thrown off the boat. And so John's just like, all right, Croyce, you grab Callie while I fight Pound Cakes. And so he fights Pound Cakes on the boat, but unfortunately Pound Cakes manages to get away. A helicopter comes in, she jumps onto it and flies off, while John has to deal with the getaway boat as it's currently out of control. So he ends up crashing onto a beach, and he jumps off of the boat and wants to head off to Pound Cakes, but Kelly is like, no, like, we gotta stay here and make sure everyone's okay. And John's just like, fine, like, because he's in love with Callie, she kind of manipulates him into not going after Pound Cakes, because she doesn't want him going after Pound Cakes. Pound Cakes is part of their plan. And this really pisses John off, because he gets in trouble later for not taking down Pound Cakes. Pound Cakes ended up getting taken down by the Avengers, and that pisses John off even more, because there's nothing he hates more than the Avengers completing a job that he was supposed to do. And so now they don't really have any kind of leads. They just need to wait for the bugs to get delivered to S.H.I.E.L.D., and then S.H.I.E.L.D. will be able to analyze them and figure a way to find out who is behind this, because Wachowski isn't the mastermind behind this mind control bug thing. The mastermind is the power broker. The power broker, the one that gave John his powers. They actually found, so Croyce, one of John's friends, found the mind control bug that Callie had put on him when they visited Atlantis, and he took it off. But then Callie goes and visits John at his house and tries to like make out with him and slips another one on. And John tells her to leave. And he gets in the shower, and Allie calls him to ask him what's going on. And John suddenly gets taken over by the mind control bug. And when Allie is talking to him, Allie says that like S.H.I.E.L.D. has discovered that the bugs aren't controlling people. It's the mother of the bugs that is controlling people through the little bugs. And so John's mind is taken over, and he tells Allie that he's going to go to S.H.I.E.L.D. to grab the bugs and deliver them to Seattle himself, which is very suspicious. And so he heads to S.H.I.E.L.D. to grab the bugs, and they try to stop him, and John grabs them and heads off, and Callie is like, I'll go with him to make sure that he delivers them to the right place. The only reason she wants to go with him is to make sure that he's delivering them, and that S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't stop him from delivering them, Callie is like, oh yeah, I gotta make sure he delivers it to Seattle. Meanwhile, she wants him to deliver it to the power broker instead. The reason why she's doing this is because Wachowski has promised that if he becomes governor, because they're basically trying to ruin John Walker's career by mind controlling him into working with the power broker. And so if they succeed, Wachowski will become governor, and Callie will become the leader of stars. But unfortunately, Callie is interrupted by Captain America, who shows up out of nowhere because he knows that something's going on. And so he's like, all right, I'll go and deal with John Walker. Like, we'll try and find him together. And Callie does not want this. Like, she does not want to be working with Captain America, because Captain America isn't an idiot, and he will probably discover that Callie is actually a traitor. but she begrudgingly goes alongside him because what is she going to do? She can't just be like, no, I'm not going with you because I'm working for the bad guys. So she's stuck with Captain America. They're both heading off to go and find John Walker. Meanwhile, John Walker arrives at the power broker's place where he delivers the bugs to the power broker, and the power broker reveals that the next step of their plan is going to proceed with John Walker's help. Except it's against his own will. It's like, he's like, oh, you're working for me again, aren't you, John? Only this time, you're doing it against your will. And so we'll find out how this concludes in the third and final issue of this miniseries. I'm really looking forward to seeing if Captain America comes into conflict with John Walker and they fight one another, because it's been a while since John and Steve have fought each other on opposite sides. Only this time, this is against John's will. He's being mind controlled. So it'll be interesting to see how Cap reacts to that. I'm assuming that he's probably not going to want to fight John once he realizes that John isn't doing this of his free will. At least I hope that that's Captain America's reaction, because that's the kind of reaction I think Steve would have, is that he would try and talk to John and not fight him. Alright, so the final issue begins immediately with What You Want, which is Captain America versus John Walker, who is currently being mind-controlled by the Power Broker. Captain America has arrived in order to stop the Power Broker. He's working with Carly Vreese, but he doesn't realize that Carly is one of the bad guys. She's working with Wachowski, who in turn is working for the Power Broker. Because the Power Broker is such an asshole, though, he's obviously going to turn against Wachowski. He puts a bug on Wachowski's neck. He plans on controlling Wachowski's governor speech, ruining his term as the governor, because the Power Broker wants to take control of everything. He's going to take control of the World Senate, he's going to take control of Wachowski, and he's going to become the leader of the world. And so John and Cap fight, and it's not revealed until the very end, but I might as well reveal it now because there's no point in waiting. John Walker isn't actually under the control of these alien bugs. He is kind of under control, but he had his team create a power dampener so that the bug wouldn't take full control of his mind. It would just take control of his mind enough so that he would be drawn to the Power Broker. And the reason why he was drawn to the Power Broker because of these bugs is because the Power Broker has the bug's mother on his back. And he says he reveals to Carly that he found the mother of the bugs after it escaped from somewhere. We'll find out where later. And then he agrees to become the mother's food source, so it attaches to his back and gives him the ability to create these little bugs so that he can use them to control people. Because all he cares about is power and becoming the leader of the world. And so, yeah, that's the origins of how the Power Broker is doing this. And yeah, that he has an alien parasite on him. And so yeah, he turns against Carly as well. He plans on controlling her too. So he puts a bug on the back of her neck so that she can go along with his plans. She actually tries to kill him, but she doesn't do it fast enough. And he manages to take full control of her mind. Meanwhile, Cap fights John, and John is trying to get through to Cap that he's not under mind control and that he's doing the right thing, because what John is trying to do is he's trying to get rid of the bug that is on the back of the governor's neck, which he manages to succeed in doing once he finally convinces Cap that he's one of the good guys and that he's not under mind control. So Cap and John team up together after saving the governor. They go and find the Power Broker, where they go to fight him, but Carly is under his mind control, so Carly and John fight each other, and this is when it's revealed to everyone that Power Broker has the bug on his back. John manages to just pull the bug off of the Power Broker's back and tases the Power Broker, knocking him out, and also tases the bug on the back of Carly's neck. freeing her from its mind control. So they defeat the power broker, they defeat Carly, and then Shield arrives because John is about to kill the mother bug. But Shield arrives, Dum Dum Dugan, and he's just like, "No, don't kill it. Like, we need it for evidence." And so John then reveals to Dum Dum Dugan that he believes that the bug, like the mother bug, isn't actually an alien. It's a genetic creature created by S.H.I.E.L.D. that escaped. And this entire time, S.H.I.E.L.D. has been tracking it down so they can bring it back to their labs and continue experimenting on it, because they're using it to try and, I guess, create a way to control the minds of criminals or something. Like, they're using it for their own dark deeds, because S.H.I.E.L.D. sometimes does slimy things. And so John, instead of giving the mother bug over to Dugan like Dugan asks, he chooses to fries the mother bug. He's like, "Tell it to see you in hell." And yeah, he just fries the bug and then storms out of the room. And Dum Dum Dugan turns to Cap and is just like, "Can you believe that jerk? Like, he just ruined everything. He ruined our entire plan. Like, what an asshole." And Cap is like, "Yeah, I think I can believe that jerk." It's a pretty fun moment of like Captain America choosing to side with John over Shield. There's also a moment where John he has the final bug that the mother bug has created after he killed it, and he puts it into Dum Dum Dugan's hand and then shakes his hand and kills the bug on purpose. He's like, "Have fun, Dugan, and you asshole," and then he leaves. And so it's also revealed that Carly was working for S.H.I.E.L.D. the entire time, and that she was infiltrating the power broker. And so because of this, and because of Carly's involvement in this whole thing, she gets discharged from S.H.I.E.L.D. and has to serve some time in prison because of this. Governor Wachowski doesn't get elected as governor. He loses the election. And John does get discharged from STARS for a little bit, but eventually he gets reinstated by Val, and she communicates to him and is like, "Hey, we got a new job for you to do." And John's just like, "Awesome. Back to doing what I love doing, taking down criminals." And so all ends well for John. He comes out on top of everyone. He makes S.H.I.E.L.D. look... he humiliates S.H.I.E.L.D. He, gets back at Carly for betraying him and being a traitor. And he just gets to continue doing what he loves doing, which is taking down criminals. And so that's where the issue ends. The miniseries ends. And overall, I think this miniseries wasn't as good as the previous one. I think it just goes to show that Mark Gruenwald is one of the few people that can really write John Walker perfectly. Not saying that Jerry Ordway didn't. I just don't think that the idea that Jerry came up with for this series was as good as what the previous miniseries had done for it. I don't know how well an alien plotline with mind control bugs fits within a USAgent miniseries, but it didn't fit very well into this one. I'd say the miniseries didn't really get interesting until the final issue, when we got to see John Walker and Captain America, cross paths, and the power broker's involvement. I think the introduction of this character named Carly, it kind of goes off of a lot of suspension of disbelief of the fact that I had no idea who this character was. There was no mention of her within the previous USAgent series, so I had a hard time believing that they had such a close connection. I could only believe in what Jerry Ordway was telling me, where he basically had to force it onto the reader that they had a very close relationship. The relationship was forced, pretty much. And since the comic heavily relies on this relationship that I'm not very interested in, it made the miniseries fall a little bit flat. But it was cool that Namor showed up for a moment. Like, that was a cool little cameo. We got to see a couple of obscure villains like Pound Cakes and Machete. Hydra was in it too. So there's a lot going on in this 3-issue miniseries. So it might be worth checking out if you're just into USAgent, and if you're into like government conspiracy plot lines of mind control devices and crap like that. Like, if you're into that, then you'd probably enjoy this. wasn't really my cup of tea. Hopefully, the next miniseries, which is the final miniseries, uh, starring John Walker, uh, it we'll see if it's better. Like I'm hoping it is. The next miniseries I think came at the time that Falcon and Winter Soldier, the show, came out. So they were trying to get more interest in USAgent because he had been introduced in that series. So Marvel decided to synergize by bringing back John, giving him his own miniseries. His costume looks a lot closer to the MCU version instead of the classic Cap costume. I don't know if I'm a fan of that. I kind of prefer. I'm fine with Captain America changing his costume and modernizing it, but I would always prefer it if John continuously just had the classic one and made that his look because he refuses to change his look. Like seeing him in an MCU like Captain America costume, it feels wrong. Like it doesn't feel right. But the next series is written by Christopher Priest, and Christopher Priest, he's known for writing a lot of dark stuff like Deathstroke. Like he's known for writing a lot of government-based stories like Deathstroke and things like that. So I'm sure that this next series is probably going to be quite grounded. Probably the complete opposite of what Jerry Ordway did. A lot more grounded, a lot more realistic, probably a bit more grungy, a little bit more violent. So we'll have to see how that turns out. I hope it's good because, I really enjoyed the first miniseries. Second miniseries was I was a little iffy on it. Like, it was fine. So let's hope we end on a high with this final 5-issue miniseries. So this miniseries, USAgent America Alot, is drawn by Jorge Ginty and Kyle Story. And right from the start, as soon as I started reading this, like, this miniseries is nothing like the other USAgent miniseries. Like, it doesn't even feel like I'm reading about the same character. It's supposed to be the same guy. It's still supposed to be John Walker, only he acts nothing like John Walker has been established, like how he has been established in the previous 2 miniseries. John Walker has always been kind of like a hard-headed guy, but he's a good guy. Like, he really is. He has unorthodox ways of doing things, but one thing he isn't is that he's not a racist. And yet in this, he's a racist. He's not just a racist. Like, he's really racist. Like, he's a massive bigot in this, and it feels very out of character. And I feel like I can say that because, I've read a decent amount of USAgent material by this point in time, and John Walker was never racist in those previous appearances. He wasn't racist, he wasn't misogynistic, he wasn't... The way that he's written in this is kind of like a dark parody of Captain America, unlike the original version of USAgent, which was not to be a parody of Captain America, but to just be another guy who became Captain America, who has slightly different morals to Steve Rogers. He's not a goody two-shoes like Steve Rogers is. There's a little bit... He's a bit more complicated than that. He's a little... The lines become blurred for John Walker sometimes. But he's not a bigot, and he's not misogynistic, and yet this book just has him being consistently racist. Like, it's actually frustrating to read. But I'm not surprised because, like, I've read other comics written by Christopher Priest. He has a bit of a habit for making for writing racist characters, which I get. Obviously, if you're writing a book, you want to talk about very specific subjects of matter that people don't like to talk about, and racism is one of those things. So it's very common for writers when they're writing a character that you're supposed to kind of be iffy about. Like, a lot of them would go for, oh, well, the character's not a villain, but, like, he is racist. And that's, I think, the problem with this book right off the bat, is that John Walker is supposed to be the protagonist of the book, and yet he's written like he's a bad guy, or a guy that you're supposed to hate. And I never got that vibe from John Walker reading the other 2 miniseries. You weren't supposed to hate him. you were supposed to like him, like you were supposed to understand him, like, but he wasn't a terrible person or anything. So let's just get straight into the story of this. We begin with a documentary that is being filmed about a mining town that was taken over by a company that started like sucking the town dry. And this company isn't actually a real company, it's just a front for Shield that they use. And the people behind, like the people within the town, decided that one day they were going to just blow up the company building, like the main building that was built within the town that's been sucking the town dry of money and has closed the mines, which is how they get most of their money. They decide to just blow it up. And a couple of people that work for Shield that are co-workers of Valerie Cooper see that this has gone on, and they decide that they're going to send a friend of Val's to go and deal with it, which is John Walker. And so we find John at his house, and this is where it's a little bit weird before they finally explain what's going on. He keeps ordering pizza, and the pizza guys show up, and when they show up, they open up the pizza box a little bit, and like, you know, John Walker asks them a bunch of questions where he's just like, you know, like, who are you, like, what's your name, like, how long have you been working for this company and stuff. And then he would then grab the pizza person and throw them into his basement. Eventually there's a pizza guy that shows up whose name is Maury, I think his name is. Yeah, his name's Maury. He's a 60-year-old man who, as far as we know, isn't Asian, but because he looks Asian, John just assumes that he's Asian and is incredibly racist to him, calling him like Bruce Lee and like Jackie Chan and stuff like that, and, you know, mocking him by saying like, oh yeah, why don't you fight me with your karate and stuff like that. So already John Walker is a very hateable person. You can tell that this book is following in the treads of the MCU version of John Walker, where John Walker was made to be hateable on purpose, unlike the original version of John Walker, who is not written to be a hateable character. So John Walker draws his gun on this Maury guy, asking him all the same questions as the other pizza guys, only this guy, Maury, has a gun of his own that he draws onto John. And so, you know, John asks him the questions, pulls the guy in, and instead of John throwing him into the basement, this guy throws John into the basement and asks John where the toilet is. And it's so weird, because after that, like, John gets out of the basement and he starts eating pizza with this guy, and we find out the reason why John has been calling pizza guys to come over to his house and throwing them in his basement is because he believes that somebody is trying to bomb him through pizza delivery. So he's expecting somebody will eventually show up, pretending to be a pizza delivery person, or not pretending to be a delivery pizza person, but like an actual pizza delivery person will show up, not knowing that there's a bomb in their pizza box, and so John has to be ready, and that's why he keeps like grabbing them and throwing them to the basement, is just in case the pizza is a bomb and it explodes, so that like throwing in the basement like protects them. It's really weird. So he has pizza with this guy Maury, and then he gets a call from Shield, which tells him to go to this town where, you know, the people in this town have blown up the cooperative building, and so John is sent there to see what's going on. And Maury tags along with him for some reason. I think it's because John doesn't trust him because he's racist. So he's like, come with me so I can watch you this entire time. And so he brings Maury with him. They fly away in John's jet. And then eventually they land in the town. They actually get onto John's motorcycle, which he keeps inside his jet. And they ride it out of the jet and land into the town. And when they get there, there's a bunch of henchmen that attack John and Maury, like these men in like armored garb and stuff, like in helmets and like military stuff. So they attack John and they knock him over. And throughout this book, we've actually been getting a couple of flashbacks of John Walker when he was a child and how he was friends with a girl that he calls Katie. He refers to her as Sis. We don't know if that means that she's actually his sister or that's just like his nickname for her when they were younger. This is another miniseries that just introduces another woman from John's past that we've never heard of before that is apparently very closely tied to him. Like it did it in the last miniseries, and then in this one, we're introduced to Katie because it turns out that one of the armored guys that knocked John over is Katie because she removes her helmet, reveals herself to be Katie, and John's just like, Katie? What are you doing here? And that's where it ends. That's where the first issue ends. Already, I really don't know how to feel about this book because I'm not going to say like the book is bad because it's not. From a writing standpoint, it's, you know, it's fine. But from a character point of writing John Walker and as a USAgent series, I think already I'm not enjoying this one as much as the original miniseries, and it's sad that this has just kind of gone downhill already. Like the 1993 one is the only one that I really enjoyed so far, but who knows? Maybe the series picks up. Maybe John stops being racist, and starts being written more in character. I don't know. I guess we'll find out in the upcoming issues. All right, so we get into issue 2, and there's something that needs to be established, which is the fact that USAgent isn't just the name of John Walker. USAgent is now a title that multiple people can have. John Walker used to be USAgent. He's not USAgent anymore because he quit. And so Val Cooper is really annoyed when she finds out that they called John Walker to go and help with the town where the power plant had been blown up. There's also this guy called Mr. Manning who's giving a speech, and he gets into a car, he mentions Val Cooper, and then he injects himself with some kind of serum, and it causes him to become super jacked, and he'll be more important later. But he doesn't actually show up for the rest of this issue until the very end. Meanwhile, John has arrived in the town where he comes face to face with his sister, Katie, or Kate. She is actually his sister, and she was not in any other books before this. This is her debut, because it's one of those plots where it's like, oh, it's revealed that John had a sister the whole time. Like, because we knew he had a brother. He had Mike. And this book actually frustrates me because it retcons a lot of the stuff that we just read in the previous books, which is really frustrating. It fully retcons Mike's death. Basically, I'll just say it right now because it doesn't really matter when I say it. It just kind of is brought up in this book randomly because the whole time John and Katie aren't getting along. And the reason why they don't get along is because back when they were young, their house got set on fire somehow and was burning down, and John saw his sister leaving with their mum, and they were leaving him in the burning house, and then he got saved by his brother Mike. And he imagined his Mike was like Captain America. That's kind of what he saw Mike. So it looked like Captain America was saving him, but then it turned out it was Mike, dressed up in his army uniform. And so from that day forth, John always idolized his brother and hated his sister for abandoning him. And instead of trying to mend their relationship, Katie just decides to try and dig even deeper by telling John what she believes is the truth, that we don't even know if it is the truth, in that Mike didn't die in the war. First of all, the way John thought he died was also retconned. Like, we already saw in one of the previous miniseries that at a certain point in time, John went back in time to try and save his brother's life. And we saw how Mike died. He got shot and died. And this series just completely forgoes that and says that, no, the way Mike was thought to have died in the army was in a helicopter crash. But then Katie, towards the end of this issue, says, John, Mike didn't die in a helicopter crash. Like, Mike was an alcoholic and he shot himself. And we actually see it happen. We see Mike drinking and then he grabs his gun and he shoots himself. You know, and I'm reading this and I'm just like, why? Why the blatant retcon? When was this retconned? Was this retconned in previous issues? Is this a thing that Christopher Priest created specifically for this? Is this a case of Christopher Priest not reading the previous miniseries and so not knowing that Mike's death was revealed in that? Like, did he think that, like, was it one of those cases where he's like, he knew Mike died in the army, but what he didn't know is that a previous USAgent book did show Mike's death. Like, did Christopher think that Mike's death hadn't been shown yet, and so he was able to come up with it himself? Or did he know he was retconning it? I mean, he had to have known, right? Because, like, he created this Katie character who was not established in previous issues. You know, it was known for a long time that John only had a brother. That's one of the major problems with this book so far, is that it's just changing everything. Like, if you're a John Walker fan, don't read this book because you're probably not going to like it. You know, unless you're a fan of him after, like, the Disney Plus series, and you'll probably be fine. But if you've read the other stuff with John Walker in it, do not read this miniseries. I'm just going to say it. Don't read it because you won't like it. Because it just completely changes everything that you know about John Walker. So, that happens. All of these things are revealed about John and Katie's past and Mike. Meanwhile, Val Cooper goes and gets really mad at the guy that sent John Walker to the town. And Maury is doing stuff with the townspeople. You know, he gets taken away by a couple of the children who are kind of messing with him. The town doesn't have any gun laws, so the children are just allowed to run around playing with guns. They're not loaded, but they allow the children to, like, clean the guns and stuff, and so they are messing around with Maury, pretending that they're going to shoot him with the gun when they're not going to. It's really weird. There's a lot of weird patriotism stuff in this. So far, this book is definitely dealing with, like, the wrong kind of patriotism. Yeah, you know, you got John Walker being incredibly racist. You've got this town, you know, being really, like, having no gun rules, you know, just having their kids running around holding guns and stuff and being okay with it. Yeah, and then the book ends with all of Katie's men getting their throats slit by a bunch of guards, and Mr. Manning shows up, and he's, like, super buff, and he's rocking an outfit, and he starts making out with Katie, and she calls him USAgent because it turns out that this Mr. Manning guy is also a USAgent, or he is the new USAgent to replace John. I don't know. We're gonna have to find out in the next issue. Yeah, this book's wild so far. Right, I have no idea what's gonna happen next. All right, so in this issue, we are introduced to Lamar Hoskins, and if you don't know Lamar Hoskins, he is a close friend of John Walker, who, when John became Captain America, Lamar became his Bucky, and then eventually rebranded himself as Battlestar. So in this book, we also get to, like, in this issue, we also get to discover who Mr. Manning is, or kind of like what his deal is, because as we know, he's become the new US agent, and his thing is that he hates black people who he blames for them being oppressed as a race. So basically, he hates it when black people are acting like stereotypes. It's hard to explain. That's the best possible way to explain it, is that he he hates black people who feed into the stereotype or are partly responsible for making it easier for black people to get oppressed, or like, for example, he hates Lamar Hoskins because Lamar sided with John Walker, who is a known bigot and is the face was the face of America at one point, and Lamar saw that as not Lamar, Mr. Manning saw that as Lamar betraying his own people. There's also another time we see Mr. Manning when he was younger. He comes across a couple of black guys, and they are, acting in a way that Manning doesn't like, and he kills them both because he sees them as like a disgrace or an embarrassment. And like, Lamar calls him brother, and Mr. Manning is like, brother to me. And so he actually shows up in the town where the power plant had been blown up, because as this book is going on, we're kind of putting the pieces together where the reason why this power plant existed is because it was a front for S.H.I.E.L.D. There were these fuel cells hidden within the power plant by S.H.I.E.L.D., and when the power plant blew up, the fuel cells went missing. And so Katie is looking for these fuel cells alongside Mr. Manning and their mysterious boss, who we'll find out, like, we'll get to meet them at the end of this issue. So Mr. Manning has arrived in the town to help search for the fuel cells, and Lamar Hoskins arrives in town as well, because he's been sent there to knock some sense into John and talk to him, because he's the only person that Val believes John will listen to, because, Lamar is his old partner. So Lamar begrudgingly goes to the town as Battlestar, where he crosses paths with Mr. Manning, who is there to try and find the fuel cells, and is teaming up with Katie. And Lamar and Mr. Manning fight each other, and Mr. Manning beats the crap out of Lamar. He basically takes all of his aggression out on Lamar. He hates Lamar a lot for what Lamar has done, and breaks his arm, and Lamar just passes out. And then, meanwhile, John heads back to the building that Kate was in. Because remember, like, Kate was in there with all of her men, and then Mr. Manning's men showed up, and they were all killed. So John goes there, and the building starts crumbling apart, and it turns out that the building is actually a helicarrier disguised as a building. And so it starts flying away, and Katie is like, "See you later, John," and just pushes him off the helicarrier, and is like, "I'm sorry, it had to be this way." And so John falls to the ground, and he's just like, "Katie!" And then Mr. Manning reunites with his boss that he calls Master, and it turns out that his master was Maury the entire time, the Asian guy that I mentioned earlier, the guy that John Walker was being really racist towards. Turns out that guy is the guy that Mr. Manning and Katie are working for. And so Mr. Manning says that they're going to be continuing with the next step of their plan, and we're going to have to find out what that plan is. Probably to do with finding the fuel cells, and we don't even know why they want to look for these fuel cells, like why they need them. But we'll probably find out, if not the next issue, the one after that, because we've only got 2 issues left of this miniseries. Okay, so now things get really weird. A bunch of things get revealed. We finally find out what was lying underneath the facility that was created by Shield, like the power plant that was blown up. Like we finally to find out what was hidden underneath that. We also get to learn a little bit more about Mr. Manning and his relationship with Maury. Turns out Maury does work for Val Cooper and was actually one of the guys that had trained Mr. Manning back when he was just a regular guy. He put him in this training challenge where there were a bunch of military men with guns and then a bunch of people without guns, and it was basically just a test of survival, and Mr. Manning managed to survive. He used people as meat shields and ended up killing all of the military men and was the only guy left. And after that, we learn how Mr. Manning met Katie Walker. Turns out, one day, he was having a conversation with the senator. Katie accidentally walked in on the conversation, was like, whoops, sorry, alright, I'll leave. Sorry for interrupting. And then Mr. Manning was like, I like that woman. And then they slept together and decided that they were going to help each other meet each other's ends. Maury doesn't recognize Mr. Manning, or he goes by the name Saint now. So Maury doesn't recognize him, probably because he's trained a lot of different people. Saint, I think, is supposed to be an example of somebody who is racist but doesn't believe they are racist, because his idea is he's like, I'm black, so I can't be racist to my own people. Like, that's not racism, you know. I just hate them because I'm better than them, kind of thing. So like he's actually like deluded himself into believing that he's not racist, even though he is hating people, even though they are his own people. Like he's hating them, you know. He's spreading hate at them and stuff, and so that is racism. But he doesn't see it like that. He just sees it as, oh, they deserve it because they are the reason that people like me are mistreated, like the rest of us. That's why I don't consider them my brothers, because I blame them for our mistreatment. So he goes off to find Katie, right? After he's beaten the crap out of Lamar Hoskins. He gets into a helicopter. He flies over to the helicarrier that Katie is in. Meanwhile, John Walker goes looking for Katie as well. Somehow he gets a plane because he lands back in the town. Because remember, he got pushed off of the helicarrier by Katie. He uses the shield to take the impact when he lands on the ground, and then just gets an aeroplane out of nowhere. They don't show how he got it. He just finds an aeroplane. He gives Lamar over to Maury so that Maury can take him to a hospital because Lamar is in really bad condition. Maury also says to John, he's like, be careful. I think I might have trained that guy. And so that's when John figures that Maury did actually work for Val and that he was lying to him the whole time. So yeah, John gets into an airplane. He heads to the helicarrier where Katie is. He comes across the Saint, and John and the Saint are like shouting at each other because they're eventually going to fight one another, but at the moment they can't because John is holding on to, like, he's flying in an aeroplane. It's actually a biplane, and Saint is on the helicarrier. And then John finally sees what S.H.I.E.L.D. was hiding under the power plant the entire time. I am not kidding when I say this. It is a freaking dragon. It is like a blue anime-ass looking dragon. Like, it looks like Shenron but blue. Like, it's ridiculous. You know, in fact, you know what it looks like? It looks like the blue dragon from the video game Blue Dragon. I don't know if you've ever played that video game. It's really good, but yeah, it looks exactly like that dragon, which is insane. I was not expecting this book to just have a dragon show up, like to just turn into an anime towards the end, but that's what happened. And I guess in the next issue, the final issue of this miniseries, we're gonna see John Walker fight a dragon. So let's see how that goes down. Yeah, so going into the final issue, it turns out the giant dragon that appeared at the end of the last issue is a kaiju. And the kaiju is very important because that is what Manning was after this entire time. Like, Mr. Manning, aka the Saint, that serum he was sticking in his arm to give himself super strength, that's kaiju blood. It's like kaiju serum, is what they call it. And Kate has taken the kaiju serum as well. She's created her own US agent shield and become a US agent as well because she wants to stop Mr. Manning because she knows exactly why, what he's doing. He's trying to get this kaiju serum. Kaiju serum is really dangerous, and so she's going to try and stop him. Meanwhile, John is trying to survive this giant kaiju dragon as it starts ravaging the town. Um, Kate and Mr. Manning have a massive fight on the helicarrier where Kate grabs like a metal rod and jams it inside Mr. Manning's ear, causing him to cough up all sorts of blue, nasty goo because it's the serum that's in his system. Because, yeah, all he cares about is just making sure he secures and keeps that kaiju safe because, he wants that serum, like he wants to continue having the serum so that he can keep being this American, like this, US agent persona that he's created for himself, this saint persona. But obviously, he sees himself as being like the savior of America, like America's true savior. Um, and we all know that he's just a massive hypocrite who is racist but doesn't think he's a racist. And Kate believes he's a hypocrite as well. But unfortunately, she gets the short end of the stick because while she's fighting Mr. Manning, he pulls a gun out and shoots her in the head. And that's when John arrives because while Mr. Manning and Kate are fighting, the kaiju rams into the side of the helicarrier, which has crashed into the ground, and that causes Kate to jolt around and allows Mr. Manning to catch her off guard and shoot her in the head. And that's when John arrives. He sees that Kate is dead, and in all honesty, he doesn't really care. Like, he cares enough that he's going to kick Mr. Manning's ass, but he was going to do that anyway, regardless of what happened to Kate. Like, John doesn't really care about Kate. I don't really care about Kate. Like, is it sad that a young woman died? Yes, but do I care about the character at all? No, because she was introduced within this miniseries and she died within this miniseries, and she's probably never going to be mentioned again. In fact, I don't even know if John Walker shows up again after this. He might. All we know now is that John is going to fight Mr. Manning, which he does. He has a massive fight against him, and John wins. He beats the crap out of Mr. Manning until he's, a bloody pulp and gets out of the helicarrier dragging Mr. Manning's body, hands him over to the authorities, and then John heads home, and that's it, really. Like, he heads home after having completed his mission, and he does reminisce on his family when he gets there. He finds a portrait of him, Kate, and Mike, and like he's kind of sad about Kate and her death. And that's kind of it, really. We're kind of left on a bit of a cliffhanger as to like where John's life is going next, because now that that mission's over, he hasn't been reinstated as a US agent. He's just going to be continuing being a freelance agent, I guess. Yeah, I don't know, putting his life back together after everything that's recently happened. But that's it. That's the end of the miniseries, and that's it for every single solo series starring US agent aka John Walker. I'm sad to say that going into this series, reading that first miniseries, I was pretty hyped at first. I was reading that first series, I was well into it. I was like, I'm really enjoying this. This is great. This is going to be a great a great video to record. But then as it went further on, it felt more and more like a chore having to read these issues and record them. And I always hate it when that's the case, when I'm not enjoying a series and it just feels like it's just a chore to read, where I'm just kind of like, I'm reading it, but at the same time, I'm kind of skimming it because I don't really want to read it because I'm not really enjoying what I'm reading. It's like that kind of thing where it's like I'm reading it because I have to, because, I committed to do it. But at the same time, I'm kind of skimming through it and it's not something that I'm going to be retaining. Like, I'm not going to remember what happened in this tomorrow. Like, I'll be just moving on to my next book and reading that. So I will say, if you are planning on reading any of John Walker's miniseries, just read the original one written by Mark Gruenwald. Mark Gruenwald is the only person that can write John Walker in an interesting way. Many writers have tried. All of them have failed. They don't get the character. I think Mark is the only person that really gets him. I do like the MCU version, though, but the MCU version is heavily based on the original version of John Walker. So, like, they go with the idea of, like, he's kind of hateable, but at the same time, you also understand him. Or at least that show is trying to make him someone that you're supposed to hate. They do a good job at that. While this book can't decide, like this last miniseries just couldn't decide whether or not it wanted the reader to hate John Walker or sympathize with John Walker. Because why are you ever going to sympathize with a character who is a racist bigot? Like, it just doesn't really make any sense. Give me the John Walker from the original series any day. Even the one from the Jerry Ordway series. Like, the Jerry Ordway series was nothing special, but at least John Walker wasn't a racist in that. Like, just give me that version of John Walker, the one that's just a little bit edgy. Edgier Captain America. That's all I really need. But yeah, if they ever release another John Walker miniseries, which chances are with the new Thunderbolts movie coming out and John Walker's popularity most likely climbing after these movies. Who knows? Maybe another miniseries will come out, or an ongoing. And if that happens, maybe I'll cover it in the future. And hopefully it's good. But yeah, check out the original Mark Gruenwald series and not the other ones, unless you feel like you have to. But that's going to be it for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed. It. Sorry if I felt a little bit out of it towards the end. It's because I was, like, just to be 100% honest with everyone, it's like, I was out of it. Like, I wasn't enjoying the comic I was reading, and that makes it a little bit harder to be, like, enthusiastic and be, like, really into it and stuff when you're reading something that you're just not into. But yeah, I'll see you next week for the Identity Crisis video. So yeah, my phone finally came back. It's all repaired, and that's got all my recordings done it for Identity Crisis. I was recording that over a month ago, and I never got to finish it because broke my phone. But yeah, that's finally back. So next week, I'll finally be dropping the Identity Crisis episode where I read all of Identity Crisis. And so look forward to that. That's going to be a real good one. That is a series that I did enjoy reading. So yeah, should be a good one.